So my name is Richard Freistadt. I will be your moderator for the next hour and a half. I serve as Associate Dean for Executive Education here at Duke, working out of the Fuqua School of Business specifically. So it's my pleasure to welcome you and to get us going as we talk today about leading innovation for maximum impact. We have two of really, I could say, the rock stars at Duke right now here to provide the expertise on the session. Before I let them introduce themselves, let me quickly say this is going to be interactive. Don't get too comfortable in your seats because in just a few minutes you're going to be getting up and doing some work yourselves. So just with that preview, let me turn it over to Suresh. Why don't you introduce yourself first, please?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Suresh Balu. I'm the Associate Dean for Innovation and Partnerships in the School of Medicine. And I'm also the director for Duke Institute for Health Innovation. What that means is we develop new care innovations and put that into practice here at Duke Health and then scale it outside as well through company formation or licensing.
Jamie, please.
I'm Jamie Jones. I'm Director of Duke Innovation and Entrepreneurship, Duke INE, and I'm a faculty member at the Fuqua School of Business and looking forward to engaging with all of you today.
We got the right people, right? Absolutely. We also have you, so we're going to start with you. What we have up here is a basic framework of the innovation engine itself. And as we all can see, there are four distinct parts or pieces of the innovation engine. And while they each operate distinctly, ultimately for innovation to happen and for innovation to be successful within any firm, from a startup to a Fortune 50 company, doesn't matter what it is, these four pieces have to interplay together seamlessly and in a coordinated fashion. So as we dive into the session today, we're going to talk in more detail about each of the four pieces and how they can work individually and together. But before that, we want to understand where you are in terms of these four pieces. And so what we're going to ask each of you to do is we're going to take a few minutes. You see you have Sharpies on your tables. For those in the back two tables, there's extra Sharpies on the tables up here, and you can share with each other. And we have four Post-it boards up here. Talent, strategic alignment, culture, and infrastructure. What we're going to ask you to do is over the next few minutes, think about what challenges are you or your firm facing in each of these areas that you perceive or might perceive as hampering innovation. And we want you to just put some of the notes up on the board so we can have that as a base foundation to speak to as we talk about each of these in more detail. Sound good? Everybody know what to do? Get up and get going. Cool. As we go to the next part of this, I allow our two experts to reflect on what you all have put up there to get us going here. Let me first say two things. I heard a couple people coming up mention the word, this is like a therapy session. And so Jamie and Suresh, I think we're very much designed the right thing. We're in the right place. And in my own experience, I think that speaks to the stress that sits on leaders around what it takes to drive innovation successfully. It is real for you, it is real for your organizations, and that's warranted, and we need to talk about that. The other thing that I just think from a quick observation of the four boards is we seem to be slightly more heavily populated in the culture and talent areas, which tells me, not surprisingly, people, human beings, tend to be some of our biggest obstacles and challenges when navigating towards innovation. So this makes sense, and it's in alignment with what we know, but all four pieces are important. So Jamie, why don't you offer any reflections on talent and strategic alignment?
When I look at this at the highest level, if I were to abstract back out, the thing that I'm noticing is some intergenerational tension. And so that comes out in multiple ways, including about four that say not motivated, youngsters with unrealistic expectations, generational IT knowledge, and so ability on opportunities to train the next generation. Talented young people are too specialized and afraid of failure. And so again, there's other things up here that are really important, but what I'm seeing, young talent that's exciting is excellent at setting boundaries and adapting my habits to the team. So again, it's some of the intergenerational things that are at play when it comes to our talent base around innovation and entrepreneurship. And then when I move to strategic alignment, I'm seeing the usual, which I think can be summarized at the balance between delivery and discovery. So that tension of the urgent and what you need to do right now in order to deliver the value that you've promised to your customers and your clients, tangled with the urgent short-term, what we need to execute on in terms of business development, et cetera. And then I'm also seeing the second bucket here around communication. Communication and strategic alignment of what are our strategic priorities and how are we all going to get behind those. So that's my synthesis of your two contributions from talent and strategic alignment. Suresh.
Once again, I think culture eats all three of them for lunch. So if you really look at the stuff that I see in here, the common theme here in the top left side is culture of failure. Will failure be taken into consideration? People are punished for failure or mistakes, right? And then having to prove value every single step of the way. Innovation is not about proving value alone. In one specific case, it's about looking at it in a broader picture to create value. That's one particular piece. The other piece is generational aspects of it. People want to work from home. Those type of aspects as well is captured in here. Again, people are not used to thinking outside the box. That's the other aspect that's been put in here as well. So you can see these are common things that we face here as well. There's nothing different, but it's nice to see that being captured in a very simple and a very, I would say, thoughtful manner, right? The other piece that I see is frozen, right? I think things are just frozen. Nothing ever changes, status quo. That's what it is. So these are the types of things that we see in here. That is pretty much the same. Moving over to the infrastructure side, again, this is about too much focus on short term, so there is lack of investment in the recent set of technologies, no investment, looking at high cost of debt. The other aspect is even if investment is made in certain sets of groups, organizations are siloed, which means that you're not able to bring in the synergies that should be brought in. So those, one piece of it, red tape. And then the other aspect is, are we really investing in the infrastructure for scaling? That's an important aspect of it. And then looking at, there are other aspects of infrastructure, which is about, do we have the strategic funding? This is related to how do we really improve public health? How do we go about doing that? And then are we leveraging the latest set of technologies? Are we going to stick with the legacy systems? This is all related to the infrastructure pieces in there. So it is pretty comprehensive in many ways to see that infrastructure is still an important issue for innovation.
Thank you so much. What's so great about laying out these individual things that you're facing is, I think, to start to draw out the themes, right? Later this afternoon, Professor Sim Sitkin is going to be talking to you all to close out the day. He and I talk quite often, and we love talking about what he calls the uniqueness paradox. And that is how so many times businesses and leaders of organizations truly believe that the challenges they're facing are only faced by them. There's this belief that it's so unique to me, nobody else has this. And the fact is that everybody believes that, yet they're all facing some of the same challenges. So part of the value here is to hear from the two experts, but to also interact with each other to say, hey, you're dealing with the same thing I'm dealing with. It might be a different industry, type company, whatever, but if we put our heads together, there might be some ideas that we can leverage to move this forward. So with that said, let's start diving deeper into this. Jamie, why don't you take us into talents?
All right, let's start with talent, one of my favorite topics, because at Duke INE, our mission is around education and educating around the entrepreneurial mindset. And so you're going to have a chance to dig in and experience some of the things that we work with the current generation of students on, hopefully, so that they are better employees when they come join all of you at your organization. So let's dig into talent. Talent is challenging because we know all of you in this room have likely been rewarded for execution, for delivery, right? You're efficient, you find a problem, you solve it fast. That's what you get rewarded for. But what we also know is you have to balance that delivery with discovery skills, taking the time to fuel your toolbox so that when you see a new problem, you have creative ways to solve it. The way that our brain forms new ideas is a process called associating, which means we need to grab as many pieces of data, disparate pieces of data and information, so that when we encounter a new problem, we're equipped to solve it. And the way that we do this is by practicing 4 very specific behaviors, very specific skills that will feed that toolbox so that we're equipped to be able to actually creatively solve problems when we encounter them. And those 4 behaviors are questioning, observing, networking, and experimenting. And so we're going to quickly walk through each of these, and I'm going to challenge all of you to formulate some takeaways for yourself today of how you're going to change. Not just focus on delivery, because we're all exceptional at delivery and execution, but how do you make time and space for the discovery activities that we all need in order to be successful? We're going to start with questioning, and this is really about going deeper. This is beyond asking clarifying questions. Most of us are good at this. This is about us challenging the status quo. It's about exploring new possibilities. And the good news is we are at 8 questioners, because how many of you have children or had children or have nieces, nephews, etc.? Yes. And at age of 4, what do? Oh, to the point where what? Thank you for the honesty of this. It drives you nuts. They cannot stop. It's why everything, right? They want to understand the world around them, and they're constantly asking why. Why questions that we take for granted. And what I find so fascinating is what the research shows is that by volume of sentence structure, we will ask more questions at the age of 4 than we will ask for the rest of our lives. Look how rapidly that yellow line tapers off. Why? Why do we stop asking questions? What? People dismiss them because you got tired. You were like, please don't ask me another question. What do we say now? Google it, right? What else? Why do we stop asking questions? We don't want people to know that we don't know. So this is also about the same time that we start recognizing that we are part of a social structure, right? And we start worrying deeply about what other people think of us. And so what happens is we actually have a fear response, and evolution is to blame. So indeed, we have survived because we are mammals by being able to affiliate, by being accepted into the pack, right? And so what happens is when you ask questions, questions can be seen as dissonant. They can challenge the status quo, and that can make others uncomfortable. And that can challenge and threaten your place in the pack. And so you have an evolutionary biological response when that happens that you have to overcome. And so part of it is taking a moment to pause, acknowledge what's happening. When you get those butterflies in your stomach because you're getting ready to ask your leadership team, your boss, whomever, a really hard question. Like, why is that our strategy? You know, the things that feel like you're challenging the norm. And so we have to work ourselves through that by actually saying, how bad could this be? How bad could this actually be? It's probably not as bad. If I ask this question, what's really going to happen? And I would say it's probably not nearly as bad as you think it's going to be. And so we're going to take 30 seconds, and on your we'll have a tornado drill. No, it's just an alarm. Okay. Why? Okay, so for 30 seconds, I want you to grab one of the sheets of paper, and I want you to make a commitment to some way that you are going to practice the questioning behavior next week, over the course of the weekend into next week. I just gave my students the following challenge. They had to ask a question in every single class and meeting that they attended over a week and reflect on that experience. It's all good. We're going to keep going. 30 seconds. What are you committing to this week? Are you committing to asking a specific question? Is there something that's been burning inside of you that you want to ask? All right. So we've talked about questioning. We're now going to talk about observing, because the reality is, while all of us may be seeing, we are not actually processing the information around us. And one of the best ways that you can find opportunities for innovation and entrepreneurship is to start intentionally observing, intentionally seeing the world around you. And you all are Duke alums, right? You're Duke alums? Which means you are some of the brightest humans on the planet. I am confident in this. So we're going to play a little game. I want you to, for the next minute, I want you to watch this video, and on your little sheets of paper, make a note of all the things that you see change. Again, best and brightest in the world. Best and brightest in the world. Make a note.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts and precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the grass in the master bedroom.
I'm buttering his lordship's gold pillow stairs, sir.
I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest. Lady Smythe. How did you know, madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her.
I'm going to come back to it. Okay. Who saw 15 things? Who can identify 15 things that changed? 10. 8. 6. Y'all, come on now. You are Duke alums. I had high expectations. 8. 6. 5. Come on. Merrick.
Yes.
Give me your 5.
The bear got replaced by a knight.
You got it.
The person was holding a candlestick, a roller, then turned into a candlestick.
I love the resolution you're giving me on these two.
The clock by the person who is dead changed.
Yep.
The woman wore a hat that wasn't wearing a hat. That's it.
All right. What else we got? Give me a couple more.
Flowers changed.
Flowers changed.
The woman holding a pot or pot.
Pot changed. Ooh, we got 6, y'all. All right, here we go. Here we go. Prepare to have your mind blown.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord's rest. Lady Smythe. How did you know, madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away. It's just a matter of observation. The real question is how observant were you?
Yeah. We were so close. We were so close with our 6.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts and precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the grass in the master bedroom.
You slide by me.
I'm buttering his lordship's gold pillow stairs, sir.
I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest. Lady Smythe.
All right. So what happened? What happened that we did not see the 21 changes? They were taking place right before our eyes. Why? There's so many. What else is happening? Tunnel vision. There's one other really critical point. What happened? Why were we able to see it later? On the second version. Change of perspective, right? We zoomed out and we were looking for it. And so our brains are amazing and also incredibly frustrating. We take in about 11 million pieces of information per second, and our brains can process about 40 to 50 pieces of information. And so that we are under cognitive overload. So our brains filter. They filter and they help us decide what we actually need to be processing and thinking about, and so what versus what we just need to ignore. And so this is really a hindrance when you're thinking about innovation and entrepreneurship and trying to identify opportunities to innovate. So we're going to take 20 seconds this time, and I want you to think about how you're going to commit to strengthening and enhancing your observation skills over the course of the next week. One of the exercises we just did with our students is we actually went to the Nasher Museum of Art and found a partner. And we spent the entire class session observing together a single piece of art, noticing the differences between what we each saw and sharing that back out, highlighting again the importance of diversity and innovation and entrepreneurship. All right. Networking. We all know networking is important. Networking helps us connect across ideas and industries, right? Some of our most powerful ideas come at the intersection of two industries. This has been well documented and proven throughout history. It's been coined the Medici effect from the Renaissance and the power of the ideas coming from blending art and science and history, for example. And so why do we not actually take the time to network? Until we need something, right? When we need something, we go network. But we don't network for ideas. And that's because we all feel like we're too pressed for time, right? How many of us are giving up the important, the learning from others, the expanding our toolkit in order to tackle the urgent, in order to tackle our discovery skills, or our delivery skills? And so I encourage you to commit to practicing your networking. And actually, you are at the perfect place for it. The fact you all are here tells me this is important to you because you have carved out the time to actually meet others who are outside of your network doing different things. And so take advantage of that opportunity today over lunch to continue to learn and get ideas from those who are in other industries. And our final behavior that we need to practice is experimenting. And so this is how do we actually, in a resource-efficient way, test new ideas efficiently. And so many of you, how many of you have heard of the lean startup principles? Lean startup, raise your hand. All right, so this is a phrase that was coined out of Silicon Valley. It's about how do I build something that is not a full product, test that product, learn from it, iterate, and continue this process efficiently. So not building out the full product, but building out only what I need for my customers to be able to give me real feedback. This is circulated widely. GE and others have adopted it for their internal innovation engines. Any scientists and engineers in the room? A few of you. What does this remind you of? There's a process. Agile. Anybody got 7th graders, 5th graders, to 7th graders? Thank you. This is the scientific method. This is what I love about Lean Startup. It is nothing more than the scientific method applied to entrepreneurship and innovation. We can all do this. You identify a hypothesis you have about something new that you're trying to do. You design an experiment to test that hypothesis. You run the experiment, learn from the data, determine whether your hypothesis was true or false, and start the process all over again. So love this. We can all do it. So we know that we need to experiment. This is well documented in the literature. But the challenge is, again, we are mammals. And this is hard, right? Because we are hardwired to avoid risk. Because in our primitive days, risk-seeking would likely lead to death. Now, while it may feel like failing at an experiment may lead to death, in fact, that is probably not true. And so what we need to do is start to reframe our failed test as not us failing, right? It is not us failing. It is an opportunity for us to learn. So framing it for yourself and framing it for your bosses and others, that this is an opportunity for us to learn, takes the focus away from the outcome and allows us to fight through that biological fear response that we have, that this is a threat to us. And so I encourage you to take the time to do that. And also spend some time thinking about how you can empower yourself and your team to more frequently experiment and leverage and be more resource efficient in your innovation. And so with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to my colleague Suresh to talk about strategic alignment.
Thank you, Jamie. I think this is, it's always difficult to follow Jamie. So I'm going to share with you how we've been doing strategic alignment at Duke Health as an example, and then you see how you want to adapt or adopt certain aspects of it for your own set of organizations. So getting back to innovation, if I had asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said, I need a faster horse. Henry Ford. He did not make the statement, this is what you find in the internet, don't believe everything that you see in the internet. He did not say that. But did he truly innovate is the question. So what is innovation? Did he truly innovate is the question, right? He did not invent the automobile. It was done by Carl Benz in 1886, right? That's an important piece. He did not put the whole assembly together, the assembly line. That was done by Oldsmobile, Eli Olds. Whitney did the interchangeable parts. So what did Henry Ford do? Maybe invention in color. The car was available only in black. So, no, the bottom line is it's all putting things together to really create value. That's true, but it's about the change that helps the strategic position of the organization. That's how it has to be viewed, right? So are you changing the strategic value, strategic position of the organization? That's the important aspect of it. And this is a well agreed upon definition of how you really want to drive innovation. Now, how are we doing this at Duke Health? Every time I bring about innovation or the word innovation, everyone says moonshots, right? So you hear about the word moonshots all the time. Well, moonshots are somewhere, it's an audacious project or some sort of a, I would say, scientific approach for imaginary world. Somewhere in between, that's a moonshot. It is very difficult to predict the trajectory of what's happening. The amount of investment that is required is huge. When US invested to send the man to the moon, it was 2.7% of the GDP, $25 billion. In today's terms, that is roughly about $800, $900 billion. Not possible for anyone to do. On the other hand, if you take a different strategy in terms of slingshot strategy, where you can actually deliberately do the activities that you need to do, but predict the trajectory as to where you want to be, if you have a bucket of activities focused or a portfolio of innovation projects focused, you can get the same level of returns. And that is the type of things that we can do. We are not NIH. I'm talking about Duke Health, right? We're not NIH. We don't have billions of dollars to really put into investment to really create the innovation. We look at slingshots, very carefully studied slingshots, so that we can actually create the value for our patients, for our providers, for our community, and then the whole ecosystem, and then the world as well. So that's how we've been approaching it in here. So with the notion that every single step that we do, we push the horizon so that not only we can operate at the horizon, others can operate at the horizon as well. So that's the approach that we take, so that we create the necessary infrastructure and tools so that others can innovate along with you. It's a collaborative sport, right? That's the version that we have adopted, and that's been extremely successful here. Now, getting a little bit more into the details, how are we doing it? This is a question that you would want to ask as well, right, of us. So how do we do that? Innovation does not come from top down. It typically comes bottom up. So we want to align top down and bottom up, which means that we identify the themes that are of strategic interest for Duke Health, in this case, Duke University, Duke Health, and then we identify the necessary problems that needs to be solved, which is fully aligned with the strategy for Duke Health, the strategic priorities of Duke Health. And then we get the necessary set of proposals, and then we invest in them, and then implement them as well. It's not about investing and then say we're done. It's about taking them through all the way through implementation and then seeing how it's working. So our set of metrics are clinical utility, economic utility. You can see those utility measures as well. So this is one way of sourcing. You don't want to source everything by one particular way. We want a portfolio of methods for sourcing. We have something like another one called Innovation Jam. It's primarily a local Shark Tank that we do in terms of identifying high potential ideas, and then we invest them so that it can be taken outside of Duke and commercialized and grow that as well. So these are the type of strategies that we have taken, and it's been pretty successful. As you can see, at least 12 companies created within this particular mechanism. And we stopped it during COVID. It's a fun event, but I think we certainly want to continue that furthermore. In terms of how do we invest, right? Where do you want to invest in the ideas and concepts, right? It falls into 3 different categories: core, adjacent, and transformational. It's a portfolio game at some point in time. The 70, 20, and 10 are the amount of investments that you would typically apply towards those core set of projects, right? What is core? This is about what is the product and service that you're going to develop, which is aligned with your current set of products would be core. Anything which is slightly expanding your product or service would fall into adjacent. Something radically new would fall into transformation. And the vertical axis is, where do you play? Is it same set of customers, new customers? That's the notion there in terms of the vertical piece. But this is the way you make the investment. In the long run, where are you going to get the returns, you think? Do you know? Any guess? The long term, the returns for the same level of investment is flipped over. Sorry. You get 10% from the core, whereas you get close to 70% from the transformational pieces. You are constantly changing yourself. That's the piece that you need to be planning for to get things going in here. So core is pretty much what you've been doing for the last X number of years. Transformational is something that you see, observe what's happening in the market, and plan for that, and change the market, change the customer, change the behavior to really move things forward. So that's the approach that one has to take. And that's what we are taking here as well. If you ask us our investments, it is certainly 70, 20, and 10, roughly. And then our returns are this way as well. Now, if you look at what are the projects, what are the portfolio of set of projects, this is the current set of projects that we are currently engaged in using generative AI. We have other projects as well. This is using generative AI, large language models, Llama or ChatGPT or Chat 4.0, whatever the models are. If you see, there is one project which is related to transplants. We want to change the way organ transplants are done here at Duke Health and around the world. So these are very specific transformational approaches, not done at a local level, at a national level to really drive the change that needs to happen. It'll take some time. 10 years ago, we started doing bone marrow transplants at home, right? So we are able to do such things, think through and what needs to happen, and then get those things done. So we do have a portfolio approach that we take in here to create the value that needs to happen. The other important piece is having very clear pathway in your strategy to say that we are going to demonstrate value, short-term value, immediately to show that you get the buy-in from the organization, your organization, so that you can really then get the necessary investment to scale as well. Every single thing that you build has to integrate into your, at least in our case, into our current workflow. Most of the innovations in healthcare, at least, I'm sure it's the same across the technology world as well. If it doesn't fit your day-to-day use, if it doesn't fit your workflow, nobody's going to use it. It just goes away. 80 to 90% of the digital apps in healthcare that are available, you're not using it. It's gone to the dumps because it doesn't fit your workflow, it doesn't fit the clinical workflow. So we pay a lot of attention in terms of how to really integrate that into day-to-day use. And certainly every single step of the way, you need to see how I can scale internally and how I can scale externally as well. These are guiding principles. Of course, the bottom line is you have to do things responsibly, right? It has to be ethical. It should not have bias, especially in healthcare space. That's an important piece. So we pay a lot of attention to those pieces as well before we put anything into practice.
Thank you, Suresh. So we're going to take a quick pause here because we just covered the first two areas of the innovation framework itself. So we've talked about talent, we've talked about strategic alignment. That was a lot of information coming at you in a short period of time. So let's take a pause and let's surface questions, insights, reflections from you that Jamie and Suresh can address. Yes?
I'm curious about the barriers to entry and barriers to being able to process them. I'll give you an example. We do a lot of what we call chem cycling. We're taking plastics, you want to kind of melt them down or reuse them in a refinery. So the way the grades are, so you've got big piece of equipment that you have to have, and that's proposed barriers. But then you also have regulations where it's okay for thank you. It's okay for an oil company with a cracker to have, to do this, but it's not okay for a chemical company. And this is restraining the plastics. You got a lot of stories in the press about a place down in Texas that's got tons and tons of plastic sitting there all packed up, waiting for something to happen with it. How do you, using these guidelines, how do you reduce those? Where are those ideas coming from? How are you getting like EPA? I mean, I'm all about regulations, people. You just have to have some. But how do you innovate those and change those? Because I'm not really sure we always focus on that.
Great question. So innovation within the pragmatics of governance policy and things that create barriers to entry.
I think the question is it innovation that you need, or is it awareness around what the actual effectiveness is and raising that amongst our political set to make change, right? And so to me, I would assume that a good portion of that comes from your effectiveness of being able to storytell and help people see impact through what, in aligning that with what your stakeholders, what those stakeholders actually care about. That would be my approach to thinking about it.
So in healthcare, it's highly regulated. How do you go about innovation, right? So things that are regulated, we have to follow the regulation. There is no way out of it. So we work around the adjacencies where it is truly possible to innovate, and then we work with our, at least from the Duke side of things, with our folks who work with the congressional staff in terms of really influencing them to change the regulations or work with them to do that. In fact, last week I was in Capitol to talk about, with the congressional staff and with these some certain finance committee, Senate Finance Committee, healthcare folks, in terms of how do you really adopt AI in a fashion which is appropriate, equitable, and at the same time, where should the investment go? Because there is a digital divide in AI as well. How do we really address those things? I think it has to be done through influence. And we work with our I would say, our legal and our regulatory folks to work with the congressional staff to really make those regulatory changes. But it is difficult to do innovation, like radical, disruptive innovation in a highly regulated pace.
But I definitely think there's coherent, very strong advocacy policy across a broad range of groups.
Yeah, it's about educating that certain changes have to happen for it to really affect the overall community. I think that has to happen.
Great question. And just to kind of wrap that piece up, Jamie, do you want to add anything else on that? I think it speaks to the importance of strategy being an all-encompassing umbrella that includes non-market strategy as well, right? How do we interplay with government, local policies, things like that, all critical to enable what you're trying to do. Other questions, insights so far? People getting answers, feeling stuck? Yeah, please.
For during downturns, and if you're dealing with budget cuts that you're dealing with your organization, if we're looking at long-term returns of 70% coming from the, not moonshots, but the transformative efforts,
Yep.
But we're only spending 10% on transformative, that's probably the easiest to cut. So how do we manage even just like deciding where to cut through that framework?
Strategy for innovation in economic downturns, please.
These are hard questions. I mean, at the end of the day, these are very, very hard decisions. And it takes, in my mind, it is the courage of the leadership team to stand behind the commitments, even during these downturns, recognizing the importance, because you are not wrong. It is the first thing to be cut. But what you will see is when you come back out of the downturn, the companies that thrive are those that stay committed to their innovation portfolio. It is a very short-term decision to say this is what we're going to cut now. And so how do you help people? And to me, this always goes back to a communications and an ability to paint the picture of what the future looks like so that people remain committed to what the impact and outcomes are going to be, because they're essential for the longevity of the company. And if you look at, there's a lot of research that's been done at the longevity of companies that remain on the S&P, that remain listed on as a public stock listing, and the speed at which they're turning over is ever increasing. And it is a reflection of how innovative those companies actually are. And so remaining committed to your innovation portfolio, in my mind, is a non-negotiable, but it is honestly, it's hard. Right? Money is finite in some of these situations, and so you have to make those hard strategic choices.
I cannot emphasize that. It is about leadership, and the leadership has to understand that the long-term view is truly important for sustainability of that organization. So that has to happen. It does get cut, but it doesn't become zero. That's through influence. You have to really exercise that to show that it can drop from 10 to 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, but you still need that portfolio of activities that you're going to have to really transform the company. Most recent example would be Volkswagen, right? So you know what happened. I mean, they are cutting people in Germany because they did not invest in EV. You have to do that. That is, yeah, there are so many companies which have gotten into this trouble. Everyone knows BlackBerry. As an example, now we are all using iPhones. This is the same thing, right? It's going to happen. So I think leaders have recognized that, but at the same time, it is our job to really highlight and say to the CEO, this is what needs to happen. I think that's partly our job in terms of really influencing and showcasing that we need to invest as well. In our case, I want to address your question. We have our government affairs folks in Duke are phenomenal, right? They really help change how policy has to be made for many of our healthcare related pieces. So we really rely on our government affairs. You should probably link up with your government affairs.
Yes, please.
So just sort of keying off of that, since obviously innovation requires taking risk and delving into uncertainty, but also we're evolutionarily hardwired to avoid risk and to affiliate, which means a group think that craves certainty, particularly in hard times or in stressful times like everything that's going on in the world right now. How can we inspire commitment to innovation through either, mental health changes, wellness changes, or just an approach to give people that confidence to sustain the commitment?
Great question.
That's a tough question.
More tornadoes? Okay. We're in an interior room, so I feel very safe.
Yeah.
Suresh,
So for us, the way, I think the only way to do that is to make sure that the leadership really emphasizes the need to really stay on course on that particular front, not cutting, at the same time providing the right level of, I would say, support that is truly needed, not just mental health support. It's about celebrating some of the failures, right? That's an important piece, that's a learning piece, and making sure that the whole team at the leadership level as well celebrates the failures to show that you need to be working on innovation is an important piece. And that has happened here at Duke several times, starting from COVID till even last week as well. We have regular touch points with our leadership here in terms of the CEO of the health system, showcasing how we need to really be investing in innovation to really improve the overall. As with every other healthcare institution, we are also in, I would say, significant margin pressures, but still we are investing in innovation at the same time, celebrating the failures as well so that we can drive this forward.
I'm going to jump in because I want to add one other thing to this. I think, again, everyone's stressed out, and I think the question is, and we're going to get to this, and the next topic is culture. So how do you build a culture that allows people to continue to thrive and feel innovative? When we innovate, when we're actually allowed to think divergently and creatively, it feels good. And that can be uplifting. The hard part is the execution, and when we get ground down by people saying no, 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 and our fear of failure. I think you and I may be too close to each other, I'm not sure. And so I think thinking about how do you, inside the organization, create these intentional moments to really bring people together around solving problems together. And so, and giving people that space and flexibility to be able to innovate with intentionality, right? When it is when you were expected to do it without the time and space to carve out and really focus on it, it doesn't feel good, right? And so it feels like just another thing I have to do versus how can you carve the time out to enable and empower people to actually express themselves through innovative and creative ideas. That would be my way of thinking about that problem.
Next question right here.
One more before we move on.
Yep.
So you kept talking about it starts with leadership, but I think your point is even more keen of saying it's all your team. So you've got to, if your budget is restricted, innovation needs to be across every dimension of your operation, especially in your frontline management, because that's where your mother load's going to be. And they're the ones who's living it, they're the ones who's experiencing it, so take that knowledge. That's it.
I love this. All right, so we're going to dig into culture. We're going because I think this is a perfect segue to talk about culture, because it is innovation is critically important, and it has to be happening across all levels of the organization. In order to make that happen, you have to be cultivating a culture that supports and nurtures innovation. And so we know from decades of management and organization research, these are like, if you summarize 20 years of management research on what does it mean to have an innovative culture, we know that there are 5 core values and principles. You have to have a tolerance for failure, a willingness to experiment, create an environment of psychological safety, be collaborative, support collaboration, and have some kind of level of flatness, right? An ability for some decentralization to allow innovation to take place all across the organization. We know this. You can almost take these as accepted facts. So why the hell do more organizations not actually do this? When you see these 5 things, how comfortable do you feel with them? Are you like, yeah, let's get after it?
I do.
All of these, you're on board. You're like, no problem. Hell yeah, I'm on. Okay. Anybody feel a little nervous on the inside?
But I do think that there are hiring managers out there that they put something for a budget and then you didn't quite make it. And so they assume that you failed where you really feel like you explored things and you realize maybe the technology is not up to speed yet to be able to complete what you started out with. That's my biggest frustration.
I'm loving this. We're going to come back to this. Anything else? Anybody else? How do you feel about these?
Nobody's KPIs are going to say, I failed 5 times.
Oh, we got a KPI thing. Aha. No, that is a true statement. Maybe they should. Maybe they should. Maybe we should reward, to Suresh's point, reward the failure.
I don't know why we keep using the tolerance for failure. It should be tolerance for opportunity. We need to just take that negative terminology out of every operation.
So we don't actually like the tolerance for failure. This is what I get challenged with the most. I actually have alums come say, you're teaching students to fail? That is 100% not what we're teaching. All right, so we are starting to express maybe some objection to some of these. And so I think there's a reason that organizations don't actually adopt these 5 principles wholeheartedly, because they feel a little uncomfortable, because when you say I have a tolerance for failure, there's a lot of implications for that. So maybe it needs a reframe. So let's start to break these down and talk about perhaps there's a paradox to these 5 elements of an innovative culture.
Tell me about the reframe, because it's just one person's thought. I don't have an issue with the tolerance for failure. Now, that being said, we just came to a session with Coach K. I come from an athletics background. In athletics, we have to try to succeed. And in the effort to succeed, we will fail. And we learn from each of those experiments to try. When you look at baseball, Hall of Famers, batting average are 300. When you talk about basketball players, the best shooters, like a Steph Curry, he shoots at like 40% from three-point range. There is failure.
100%. So I 100% agree with you. I'm not saying we get rid of failure. What is it that when you are on the court with your teammates and they miss a shot, what do you believe about the level of effort that they've put into trying to hit that shot?
What do I believe about that?
The level of effort.
I mean, you hope that they're putting in their maximum level of effort. And also the best creativity in the effort.
So the reason people have an issue with the tolerance for failure, the paradox to that is we have to have no tolerance for incompetence, because what happens on teams is if we have a tolerance for failure, we have to believe beyond all belief that our team members have done everything that they could have done to mitigate that failure, which is exactly what you're talking about. That's when it works, right? You have to have that trust that you have a team member who has done the background research, really thought through the potential downsides, and crafted an experiment that optimizes the chance of success. You cannot tolerate you cannot tolerate team members who are not who you don't trust, who are not performing at the highest level. This is why we get nervous about the tolerance for failure piece of this, because what we by nature, right, one of our fallacies is we will automatically assume it's someone else's fault. It's not that the environment, that when we run an experiment, it's because we thought about all the things, but we were pushing the frontier of knowledge, so failure is inevitable. But in this case, if somebody else does it, clearly they just didn't think through the variables most closely enough. Joe, and then right here.
I wonder, I don't have to worry about this in my job too much, thankfully.
I work here at Duke for the lifelong learning team who put on this wonderful program. Yay! But I wonder how much of a tolerance for failure is tied to money and the budget.
I think, again, this goes back to resource efficient testing, is how do you use the least amount of resource possible to actually test an idea to check its viability. So I've done a fair bit of consulting. I was consulting with a multinational oil and gas company, and their idea of a low fidelity test was a $4 million pilot bill. And I was like, have you even checked that the customer that you're talking about buying the output of this product, will they want it? They had not done any of the research to understand will they want it. They were starting with a $4 million spend to build a pilot. So I think there's a question about this. Do you have a follow-on?
Yeah, well, my follow-up.
Oops.
My follow-up question to what we were saying before. Number one, reality says in certain companies, in certain sports, like there is a reality of
failure,
of abject failure, like period. There is some black and white in terms of how you're being judged. We all spend a lot of time at companies saying, what is the definition of success? And trying to help people recognize what does success mean. I don't think we start at the bottom so that young people or junior people understand what we think the definition of failure is, because they may assume that any mistake, and therefore they don't take chances.
That's right. That is a great point, right? They are so fearful. And I see this every day with the generation of students that I'm teaching, 100%. Thank you for that point. I appreciate that. So again, how do you cultivate this within your team? The next is this willingness to experiment, right? We all say this, but like, again, we have resource issues. Like we're saying, well, can we actually spend money on that? And experimentation may lead to a negative outcome. And the reason that we feel a little uncomfortable with this tends to be, maybe, we need to ensure that we are doing this in a highly disciplined manner, right? Have I been thoughtful in how I design my test? Am I actually using the minimal amount of resources possible to test this idea and being disciplined in my process? And what I will say about the discipline part of this, so how many of you are in organizations where you love to start new projects and you don't love to kill new projects? Everybody's baby, right? I love this place. This place may be the worst. We love 10,000 flowers blooming, right? But at some point you have to go in and call the garden. And so this is actually one of the hardest pieces, is being disciplined about when the experiment fails, when the project is not indicating a high probability of success, being willing to actually pull the plug on that project. I have some colleagues of mine at UNC who've done extensive research on this and looked at it as follow-on funding from the VC industry. And and we know that VCs tend to, it's sunk cost. I'm going to keep re-upping my position in this company because it's a bad signal to other investors if I don't. And the ones who actually have the courage not to reinvest because knowledge asymmetry has been removed, they actually outperform other funds. And so, yep, so what happens is in the VC industry, when you invest, let's say in a Series A of a company, when they go raise their Series B, you now have insider information about how this company is performing, right? Because like you're on the board, you have information. So the information asymmetry has been decreased for you. In the VC industry, you almost always follow on with another investment because you want to hold your equity position in that investment. And if you don't invest, it is a signal to the rest of the industry that you don't have confidence in this company, and the chances of it succeeding then go to zero, approximately, right? Because no one else is going to invest. But what she found is the firms that actually have the courage to not reinvest, so call the experiments that aren't working, outperform. It's just there are very few of them that will do that. All right. Oh no, wow, that was not where we were going. All right. Psychological safety. We love psychological safety, right? But if we are going to be successful at building an innovation culture, we have to have psychological safety that is accompanied by brutal candor. Brutal candor, right? We have to be able to be brutally candid. We are too nice. In the South, we are especially nice, at least to your face. And so, again, how do we create an environment where there is so much trust and belief in each other that we feel safe to be able to fail a little bit, to not have everything succeed? Again, we're talking about that younger generation in particular, to be able to take that risk that we know could really create exceptional value for the organization, but doing it in such a way that if it's not going well and someone approaches me and we have this intellectual honesty with ourselves and the ability to be candid with each other, then we can make a decision that is not about me, but is about the organization, right? And what's best for the organization. Being collaborative. Again, we're nice. We all love collaboration. And someone said it earlier. We're nice. It's a hard time. We're collaborating. And what's one of the potential outcomes of collaboration? Groupthink, right? We all just coalesce around the same things and we don't actually push ourselves, right, to be more innovative and creative. There's another potential outcome, negative outcome to being a collaborative environment. Any thoughts on that?
Waste a lot of time.
Waste a lot of time, that's right. Who the heck is accountable for this? Who's in charge? Who is responsible when it goes south? Right? And so if we are going to be collaborative, we also have to have individual accountability. And that seems to be at odds with each other, right? That really feels like, well, individual accountability, then it's about the individual performance. It is not, because what you will find is that if you are holding someone accountable for making progress and moving an idea forward, then what they will actually do, because they are now accountable, is go seek more input from others. Because we know that other people have knowledge and information that we don't have. And so it actually drives us to be more collaborative without necessarily the negative outcomes of the group think and the lack of moving forward and indecisiveness. All right, final one, number 5, flatness, a flat organization. How do we feel? Oh, we gotta know, tell me more. This is like this sounds terrible. Why?
Well, I think there's
modeling and mentoring, as we talked about, making people comfortable. I love that. What else? Anybody else? The other part about a flat organization, it sounds great. That sounds all well and good. Ideas can come from anywhere. Yes, but do we all need 1,000 more ideas? The reality is, if you were going to have a flat organization, it has to be accompanied, which is one of the things that came out on the board up here, with really strong leadership that has effective communication, right? You have to have strategic direction, clarity of strategic direction and vision of where you're trying to innovate, what are the goals that the company has hit. That has to be communicated all the way through the organization such that we're actually working toward achieving something that creates value for the organization itself. The innovations that we're working on, the areas, spaces that we're innovating in are creating value. And so it's not enough just to be flat and let ideas come from everywhere. Those ideas need some funneling, they need some purpose, and that comes through really strong leadership, which is accompanied by good communication. And so with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Suresh to walk us through infrastructure.
I think for the infrastructure, I think we did see the lack of infrastructure or the gaps in investment. Or how do we align things together as well. So I'm going to share with you as to how we've been doing it here at Duke Health. As an example, ask questions. So one of the foremost things in healthcare, I don't know whether you know this or not, data is almost impossible to acquire, or acquire in the sense that access. Even though it is our own patient data, we still cannot access it. That's a huge problem. That's number one. Number two, I don't know whether you know this or not, data in electronic health records is a mess. When I say a mess, it's a huge mess. Seriously, I mean, if you ask for something as simple as blood pressure, there are 1,000 different ways it's measured. If you ask a simple lab value, how is your kidney functioning? It's one lab value, creatinine. It is stored in 75 different ways with various names. It's not called as creatinine. It's set up in multiple ways, various units. It's all over the place, and that is just one organization. If you go from here 8 miles down to UNC, it's completely different. You go down to Georgia, Emory, it's different. Every single installation is different. You would assume that it's standard. It isn't. So it becomes a huge problem, especially when you move your care from one place to another. It's a mess. Right? It's a huge thing. So no one has built any infrastructure for that, which means that without the necessary infrastructure, we cannot do the necessary innovation. And we had to build those infrastructure. Many a times, that itself becomes an innovation in many ways. So we had to build infrastructure to do that. This is something that we build internally at Duke. Yes, it's a technical architecture diagram, blah, 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 all that stuff. But the notion is you have to own it and take it and really drive the infrastructure needs and then make the necessary investment or make the justification to whoever needs to in terms of developing the budget so that you can get things through. Without an infrastructure like this, Duke cannot be driving the AI and machine learning, AI, ML, into clinical care today. So this is something that we had to develop. So you have to take it in your reins, make sure that you work with the necessary collaborators to really get things going. For example, IT in this case, to really develop the infrastructure and put that into practice. Along with the infrastructure, you're developing capabilities, right? So it's an important aspect. How do we develop capabilities and talent? Yes, we left talent before, but it ties in with the infrastructure as well in many ways. So the approach that we have taken is people normally talk about T-shaped people, right? Which is broad expertise and very narrow but broad expertise, like project management, those type of skill sets. But then one deep domain expertise. I think that's very nice. It helps, but I think it is slightly, I would say, older way of approaching things, and it's not worked for us. So we moved to pie-shaped people, meaning with at least two legs where you have full deep expertise so that you can create multidisciplinary teams so that you can bring together, and that is truly needed if you want to drive innovation into clinical practice. So this is an approach that we have taken, and it's been extremely successful. In our team, at least we look for such people, or we develop that phenotype internally as well. We'll develop, even though one person might have one deep expertise in one domain, we teach them the other domain so that they can really put things into practice. These are part of the infrastructure things that you need to be thinking about in terms of development of capabilities. Back to you, Jamie. Hey, have any questions? Yeah. Pie in the sense that some level of broad capabilities with deep expertise in more than one domain. Each depth is one in data science, maybe data science with clinical domain, or data science with IT aspects of it. Or maybe when I say clinical domain, it might be cardiology with oncology with data science. That's the type of domain expertise that we look for. Shape, it's primarily shape, saying that you're not looking at T-shaped, you're pie-shaped, so that you have more expertise in more than one.
Please. Yeah. Let's ask a question about centralization of innovation versus decentralization from an organizational structure. Like, you guys are, at what level is it important to centralize that innovation? Like, you have the Duke Innovation and Entrepreneurship. When you look at a company, do you centralize it in a single organization, or does, accounting have one, IT has one, or within IT, does infrastructure and applications have separate ones? At what point does it become important to centralize it versus not? You want to stop?
I have strong feelings about this. I think having a group that's assigned to be the innovators is doing the entire organization a disservice. And so the question to me is, how do you actually structure your organization so that innovation can flow and come from anywhere? You may need people who are tasked to support that. But I think, again, we need to define innovation, which is something that we did not do today, right? And so when you think about innovation, it is not just about a new product or service, right? Innovation, if we want to define business innovation, is going to be about value creation for your customer and the firm. And so that means it can come from anywhere. And so thinking about how you innovate in your internal processes to serve if you're in finance and accounting, how you innovate in your internal processes so that you serve an internal customer better to allow them to be more efficient and thereby create value for the organization and the customer is also innovation. And so when I think about innovation, you can have the innovation functions, and I know, and Suresh is running one of those. To me, it is about what is more effective, equally as effective. An element that you certainly need is to create a culture where the entire organization is thinking in this way and embracing this way of being and problem solving.
100% agree, and I'm going to mention a few things. One is, innovation, people think, is about glamorous way of putting solutions in place. It is ideally, and it is always problem curation. And when we say DHI, we do innovation. It's not, we catalyze innovation. Like Jamie said, the innovation happens in a specific outpatient clinic. The innovation happens in a hospital setting in cardiology. Innovation happens separately in OR, within that specific set of OR. These are separate sets of innovations. We catalyze and facilitate and provide the necessary resources and knowledge and the best practices that we have developed to really catalyze innovations in multiple places. If you centralize innovation, it's not going to truly work. The only thing that we make sure is that it is fully aligned with the overall institutional strategy so that we bring in the right set of resources. It also helps us coordinate the things that needs to happen. Most of the times, a specific unit might solve a specific problem, but is it going to be, let's say we solve a specific thing in our OR in our main hospital, is it going to be copied over, that exact thing, to an ambulatory surgery center 30 miles away, right? Those things we ensure that we can scale. Those are the type of best practices that we bring in so that you can scale that outside. So that's the piece. But the innovation itself has to be within the various set of units because the problem is faced there. The frontline people collaboratively develop the solutions. At the same time, we know what other people are facing as well in terms of the same set of problem. Bringing that together is an important aspect. So certain things, strategic pieces should be centralized, but the actual innovation has to be done at the end, frontline folks.
Could I ask, I'm going to jump in with a quick follow-up question on that for both of you. And Jamie, maybe more to you first, because you talked about the culture piece. You know, when I'm talking to C-suite executives in companies every day and this topic comes up, oftentimes it's we have an innovation arm sitting over here, and gosh, they hate everybody over here, and everybody over here hates them, and they can't get that integration together. And it seems like there's a culture piece to this too.
I think part of that is that structure is challenging, right? Because you have people who are on the front lines, who are seeing the problems, who know what is going to be real and meaningful versus another group that's sitting separate with the mandate to innovate. And I will say that oftentimes what I find, and thank you for your question about cutting budgets, right? Those are one of the first places they get cut during downturns because, again, they're not. It is not a profit function for the organization, right? And so I think if you want something scalable and sustainable, you have to figure out how you're going to create a culture of innovation that permeates the organization, that is accompanied by the right structure and processes that communicate the strategy so that everyone is fully aligned and what you're innovating toward is meaningful, and then allow and enable the spread of that innovation as it makes sense, which is how Suresh and the team have thought about it at the hospital.
Let's go to the question right here. Yes.
Okay, we're live. How do you address in an organization when innovation is often mislabeled, change and transformation are often mislabeled as innovation? So if team A moves from floor 5 to floor 9, then we have truly innovated. Or when change and transformation must precede innovation. So if we do this change and transformation, then we believe we are now all of a sudden going to be magically more innovative than we were before. And are there also other words for innovation? Because as a communications professional, I am tired of writing that in every business strategy document. So how can we also think about that?
It just got real. It just got real in here. Thank you for sharing that. I don't have a clear answer for that because to me, it's not actually innovation, right? It is our design. We know that we're all humans and we know that change is hard. People don't like change. So if we reframe it as something more exciting than just change, perhaps we'll be willing to adopt. So I don't have a good answer on doing that other than, again, it comes down to a leadership team who's willing to have candid conversations, right? That psychologically safe environment that we were having a candid conversation of like, listen, we're doing a strategic realignment. It may suck for a little bit, but like we're doing this because, and the desired outcome from this is X that paints a picture of the world, it's the future state we all want to be in, versus like trying to just rebrand it as innovation when everyone knows it's not.
I think we need to have candid, you need to call it spade a spade. I mean, if you're moving floors as innovation, that's perfect. And getting to the other words, I think innovation is being overused. You're absolutely right. In many ways, it's about what is the thing that you're doing to create value and strategic differentiation. I think we need to explain that. I think it is overused. Many a times I say, if it's truly innovative, it's one piece, which is novelty is another word that I novel approaches to developing solutions is how we frame it. But I think explaining what you're doing is what needs to happen. Just the word innovation is now becoming trite for sure.
Can I ask a question back? So as a communications professional who's being told to go reframe this as innovation, do you believe that if you were given free rein to be able to go in and say, listen, like this is not innovation, but this needs to happen for the following reasons, do you think the folks that are experiencing the change would actually embrace it better?
I think at the end of the day, one of the key things that I find from our people and our teams is they just want to know why. Right? So if you get really honest and you get really candid about the why, they're more likely to come along on the journey than if you sit there and just do the marketing of it beforehand. And so if I understand what's my role, what's my impact, why are we doing this, chances are you might actually get genuine innovation happening. And I think, as we heard in the plenary session, not just a one-way push of communication, but an actual dialogue. And so I think that's what's often missing. And perhaps it's the willingness to experiment or lack thereof, the tolerance for failure or lack thereof, where there's a lack of, in leadership, courage, right, to share the why. Because perhaps there's a level of fear that if I tell you why we're really doing this, then you're not going to want to do it, and I know it needs to be done.
And I wonder, I love this, thank you so much for sharing, and I wonder also if it's a fear of being questioned from the leadership perspective, right? So it goes back to this need of I don't want to be questioned, because it does create a sense of dissonance. And so thank you that was amazing. Thanks for sharing. Please.
Questions? Yeah.
So you mentioned the importance of not having this innovation wing and trying to get everybody to buy into that concept. But you also mentioned earlier that you have people focusing on delivery versus something else.
Delivery versus discovery.
Versus discovery, right? So if we're passing this responsibility to innovate onto everyone who already has their full job, they don't have an incentive to get the extra work that's going to be required to get all the way. And unless you start carving out time for everybody to innovate, that sounds really expensive and wasteful if they're not getting the stuff that they need to get done because they're being pulled in now multiple directions.
You just nailed the biggest challenge that exists, is this balancing of delivery, right, of the execution piece of this with the need to discover and discovery. And I don't, organizations handle it differently. Many large companies have, what they call tiger time or butterfly time, et cetera, where they, you're able to go explore. Google calls it 120, I think and it is basically, it was 20% of your effort, but the reality is you still have 100% of your job to do, and so therefore it becomes 120. But the idea of giving people space and time to be more innovative. But I think, again, this goes back to the folks who are trying to create the technology or the next product or service that's going to be innovative versus this notion of entrepreneurial mindset or innovator's mindset, so that every single person who is, no matter when you are executing, right? When you are executing, you are facing problems every single day that you are solving. And so my challenge to you is, how do you actually ensure that you're equipped with the toolkit that you need to think about those more creatively, so that you're creating more value for the organization and the customer, and how you solve those problems. And so it's not necessarily about the transformative innovation that likely lives in an R&D group somewhere, right? Like, that's going to be a balance. But I do believe that every single person in the organization has the power and ability to innovate that will impact the trajectory of that organization. But it's not necessarily working on the new transformative innovations, right? And so I think it is the difference of understanding what type of innovation you are doing based off the role that you are in. And that's how I think about the balancing that tension.
At least, so I'll give you a very practical example in our case. For example, you have a problem which you need to solve, right? If it's going to reduce the burden, you're much more aligned in terms of spending a little bit more time with the notion that it's going to save you 20% of your time by spending 10% of your time for the next 3 months, right? So what happens is, at least in clinical care, at least everyone is, I would say, stretched thin. So people are now focusing on approaches by which you can reduce the administrative burden, clinical burden, whatever that they have, so that you can be much more efficient, at the same time have the right outcomes. We don't want to change the outcomes. Outcomes is fixed, or probably you want to improve the outcomes. So that's the type of innovation that people are focusing now, at least in healthcare space, to address your point. And for the extra time that you spend, right, you get additional set of resources that you would not have had you not invested that 10%. So that's the approach.
Something we've done, I've run nonprofits with small teams and others. One way we've gotten at that innovation is in our weekly reports, asking people to always include a brainstorm or a new idea that would add value to either the product we're producing or the idea. No guarantee that you're going to get to do it, but I'm going to at least hear what your idea is, and then I can budget the time or budget the money in order to make it happen.
So I love this. How do you, so you get lots of ideas, maybe you see some that you get excited about. How do you then share those back out? How do you let people, like, tell me more about what happens next.
Well, these reports, we call them 515s. It should take you 15 minutes to write and 5 minutes for somebody to read. Small team of up to 10, you share them for a staff meeting. So everybody is seeing those ideas. So you can also get coalescence around ideas, or people who say, I like that idea, I have this to add to it, and all of a sudden now you have a team that's working on it. And then, but you can also discuss it and bring it back. Does that really add value to what we're doing, or how expensive do we think that would be? It's a, you know, I found it as a way of encouraging new ideas to come out, but also to have discussion about what's a good idea. Because that not every idea is a good idea.
I work with student startup founders. I know that in a way that Uber for cats, not a good idea.
The approach, but then we try to curate the problems. We don't want the idea as a solution. What are the problems? What's the pebble in your shoe, which really is preventing you? That's an approach that, that way you have that, and you then prioritize and see how it's aligned with your strategy, and then you move, think about going things through. At times, you are absolutely right, the solutions are all over the place, and many a times, these days, every solution requires generative AI. You probably don't need that. It's always, you look at the Boeing 380 to fly from here to Raleigh, right? You don't need that. That's the approach that people apply, so we need to be thinking about what the right solution is.
So one of the things I love about what you said is, like, talking through this helps people realize what a good idea is. And so one of my colleagues at the Fuqua School has done a lot of research on entrepreneurial judgment, and what he found is you can actually train your entrepreneurial judgment so that the next idea you have is better because of having learned about what a good idea looks like. And I've seen this play out in an R&D group that I was doing some consulting with, a large-scale analytic equipment manufacturer. And so what they were doing is actually having every time their scientists would come forward with this new idea, they would actually, schedule their team meeting, and you would have to build the business model canvas around it. So that you started to say, like, it's not just about the science, right? But here's actually how you have to think about, is this a good business idea? And it changed the entire culture of how that group thought about ideas. And so I loved that tweak of, like, learning ideas.
Last question, and then we'll need to wrap up. Yeah, please.
Sheesh. Talk about that relationship of change and innovation. Convincing we need to change because the status quo is going to fail in the future. It's not sustainable for where you're going. So we need to innovate to succeed. So can you talk about that relationship of change and innovation?
Perfect. And then the next question.
My question is, you talk a lot about efficiency, and I like to say in my company we do a lot of stupid things efficiently, but we're now moving to the effectiveness side, right? How can we be more effective? Because for us, efficiency sometimes means getting rid of FTEs, right? But effectiveness means we're doing something better. And maybe that can relate to your question as well, because I'm just curious, you're using efficiency a lot, so I'm not sure.
Efficiency is certainly, effectiveness is a part of evaluation framework that we have in place. I think that's an important aspect. Efficiency is important, but if it's not effective, if it doesn't produce the right set of outcomes in a much more effective manner, then I think it's thrown out right from the beginning. I think it's part of the evaluation metrics that you would have in place, without which you cannot do that. You're absolutely right. Yeah, yes, yeah. But yes, doing bad things efficiently is, it creates value for someone else. Not, yeah, so, yeah. Any comment?
Yeah, and I think that the question that you just asked about change and leading change, again, this comes with a leadership team who can set an organizational vision that gets people excited to want to go through the hard work of change and be more innovative. Because the reality is, if you don't, you will not be around. And there's tons of data to support that. I mean, I just did Tupperware last week, right? Filed for bankruptcy because they just did not innovate. They held strong to this business model that had worked for decades at a time, and they didn't want to innovate. In the world changed, the customer demand changed, and everything about the marketplace changed, and they held fast to something that had worked. And so I think it's a matter of pointing to that. So.
Yeah, so I think we are just at about time. So want to wrap things up and ask Suresh and Jamie both maybe one final thought, one final piece of advice or insight, most common mistake you see or most common ingredient for success, words of wisdom.
Oh, no, sorry, I started.
I think certainly three things that I want to say is one, innovation is a team sport. I think it is never done by one person. I think you need to have a collaborative, multidisciplinary team. Diversity of ideas and thought process is going to be an important piece. How you can secure those diversity is an important aspect in terms of really achieving innovation. That's one. The second is every innovation at some level requires change management. So having that level of leadership support, it's going to be pretty important to really make things happen. And certainly focusing on culture is going to be an important aspect in terms of driving the innovation. So those are the three main things that I would say is important. Ideas can come from multiple places, but you need to foster that culture to really drive that particular piece. It has to be deliberate.
And my takeaway that I want to leave you with is you all make a choice. We all make a choice of our behaviors that we're going to exhibit. Are we going to take the time to fill our toolbox full of new tools, understand different perspectives that are going to enable our problem solving? Because at the end of the day, being innovative, having an entrepreneurial mindset is all about problem solving. It's about solving a problem in a different, unique, and creative way that creates new value. And so with that, I encourage you to think about and reflect on the behaviors that I started the morning with and how you're going to enact them. And then secondarily, because I have to, if you want to stay connected with the Duke Innovation Entrepreneurship community, you have little codes at your table, join our LinkedIn group, get our newsletter. We have awesome events, speakers that are coming in, ways that our alumni can engage, including getting advice from other entrepreneurs if you're working on a startup or a business idea. And if you want to stay connected with me, I'm there. So I look forward to continuing the engagement over lunchtime. Richard, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Suresh, Jamie,